Welcome to Libero episode 13. I'm Jonathan Wilson. I'm joined today by Miguel Delaney of The Independent and Tariq Panja of The New York Times. Wednesday night, Barcelona v Inter, an absolutely incredible game. That's where we'll start. And then we'll maybe talk about whether Barcelona really should be in the competition and about ownership models and some lovely financial and political nuggets for people to get stuck into once we've done a cursory 2 minutes on how Lamine Yamal is absolutely incredible. Migs.
I mean, the one thing I have to say, yes, Yamal, I mean, it's just a joy to watch. I know that's a simple sentence you can have about him, but it's true. Like, I mean, the way he just took a game on his own, really, and Inter were clearly petrified of him. It's also one of the most distinctive things about him. I mean, first of all, he'll try anything, it seems, especially that chip in the second half. But what's amazing, that goal he got, I know it's the most obvious thing to point to his incredible game-saving goal, but the way he's able to arch his foot and deliver a shot like that, and where it's perfect placing, it's unique. I've seen any other player do something like that. The closest comparison I can think of is how De Bruyne, say, can deliver a through ball with any part of his foot. And also, it's not unique in the sense that's the first time he's done it. Like, I mean, his goal against France in the Euros was similar. It's incredible. And the way Barcelona have just produced another one. But there is another thing, to be fair. I mean, we're going to go into all the other side of Barcelona and that. The way they play, like, they're sort of the games you want to watch.
Exactly. I mean, the line is insanely high. That's not sustainable, right, Tariq?
Well, we've seen it at Tottenham, haven't we?
Well, that's what it was like. It was like the Tottenham-Chelsea game at moments, towards the end of the first half especially.
So in terms of the offensive, it was incredible. As Miguel's right, we want to watch 9-all football matches. Why not? You know, it's very exciting, especially if you don't kind of support either of these teams. You're sat down, you put your TV on, and these people are going hell for leather, trying to score 10 goals. Brilliant. But just on Yamal, maybe again, it's you want to romanticize the game and players when they appear like this, and where he took the ball there on that left hand side, and with the mass ranks of the Inter team there. Maybe I'm again over egging this, but that image of, do you remember Diego Maradono in '86 against Belgium?
No, it's '82. It's a myth. It's a photograph from the opening game of '82. Yeah.
There you go. Thank God we've got a.
Is it from a free kick as well?
Yeah, it's a free kick that's been taken short and the wall's breaking. So, but it's just anyway. It's symbolic of a great.
Yeah, exactly.
Why do we spend all our time on this podcast just debunking beauty? And we're about to do it. That's what this podcast's about. But yeah, anyway, the emotional truth of that photograph, Tariq.
There you go. Thank you. Yeah, and my mind just went to those moments, and that Messi's had those moments as well, where you see this little guy, and then also Inter quite a big team. That was one of the points of difference last night as well. And that's why Barcelona can't defend corners, and they come up against a team of like 8-foot giants as well. So that was quite amusing to watch in that way, and they gave that different texture. So again, the imagery of it was quite captivating. He was. When was the last time you saw a player do that on a stage like that?
The way he turned DiMarco as well, for that one he hit that was touched onto the bar, like the speed. Like, I know it's come up a lot, and you don't want to get drawn into the same trap. Oh, was he better at Messi in the same age? All this sort of thing. But I don't think I can really remember too many performances where someone that young, and obviously he was brilliant in the Euros, but this did feel a step beyond the Euros already, because he was so central to it rather than someone ascending. I was just trying to think of like similar examples where a young player has just kind of seized it to that level, and that he astounds people that much. One was Messi against Chelsea in 05-06, where he actually went off with an injury, but for half an hour he was incredible. Obviously, there's I've already seen it on kind of social media and that people pointing to Rooney, like the France game. I do think Rooney was a bit different, because Rooney was basically kind of this physically imposing power. Obviously, there was like great ability there, but it wasn't quite touch of the same level. I mean, this is like basically, it looked like a player in his prime, the way he was able to command the ball.
But even then, look, the goal is an amazing goal, and I completely take your point that the lack of backlift is something very, very unusual. But I have sort of seen him score goals a bit like that before. But the jink round DiMarco for the shot from no angle hits the bar, That is something new. Then the chip in the second half hits.
Yeah.
And it's what was really notable was the commentary. They just think he's scuffed it or fluffed it. You know, they're not even talking about it as a shot. And then say, "Oh, we got it. He's hit the bar." They think it's going miles over because he gets so much height on it. And when I first saw it, I was like, "Did he mean that?" And you see, of course, he means it. Definitely means it.
Yeah.
He's doing this is a sport that's 150 odd years old, and he's doing things I've never seen before.
Well, you might have seen it. You might have seen it somewhere. It reminded me of Wenger when he described Messi as PlayStation.
Yeah.
There was a bit. Also, he was having so much fun. He was having a load of fun there. There was a bit, and maybe people get annoyed when players do this and they want to kick them, I suppose, and say, "Well, that's just really disrespectful." But I don't think there was a bit when he was on the right hand side. I think it was towards the end of the first half. I think it was down that right hand side. He kind of just sort of rolled the ball and his foot to just get away, and it looked like you are taking the piss out of this left back a bit, but it did get him out. He did what he needed to do.
I created the space to recycle the ball round. Yeah.
It's funny in that as well, just in terms of kind of his immediate as well. I was actually watching the game last night with an agent who has a few players, and actually had one player in this game. And we were just talking about Yamal, obviously, and he went searching through his WhatsApp to see, what was the first time that he was brought up. And it was May 2022, and he's got a message off someone in football, Barca have another one. And little Yamal. But that's 3 years ago. I mean, I remember 3 years ago vividly. And at that point, obviously it's not that long ago. And suddenly there's this kind of whisper of a player coming through. And
did the agent, that's really, when can they tell? When you talk to agents probably a bit more than Wilson.
Well, funny enough, we're actually discussing exactly that, and how there's just two. So obviously, data makes such a difference now. And actually, an exact discussion we were having last night was, apparently, as soon as you have if you're an agent and you have a player who's like 16, 17, as soon as they make their debut, all of the various kind of data companies that clubs use, that suddenly triggers something. So as soon as someone makes their debut, suddenly because of that, they get 25 calls from clubs like the very next day. And obviously data can be, at that point, it's obviously slightly limiting because it's one player, but they can still tell a certain amount. But almost what was more interesting was we were talking about how in recruitment, which is it's still so crucial at that age, there's a difference between, there's scouts who basically are scouts for a first team environment, so basically senior pros, and scouts who are brilliant at seeing potential, but not necessarily for scouting players in their prime. They can see who's going to grow. And apparently Barca have one of their USPs for years has been, one of their advantages for years, is they have a lot of people who can actually do that, who can see that potential. I mean, and hence it's not coincidence, I suppose, that 20 years after Xavi, Iniesta, Puyol, Busquets, they've got Gavi, Yamal. I know Pedri's he's come from elsewhere, but they have two of them.
Yeah.
I also have people like Ansu Fati who look injury probably is what's caused that.
Yeah.
But they do have this remarkable capacity to produce them, and yet, despite having this incredibly rich seam, this incredible youth development program, despite having La Masia now, the sort of fabled sort of finishing school, talent production centre, they're more than £1 billion in debt, and in massive financial crisis. So we've had our fun. Now let's talk numbers.
Let's get the
beautiful game.
Tariq, do you want to sort of sum up where Barcelona are financially? And if you could do it quite quickly without getting us sued.
I'll use their language. When Laporta took over in 2022, the current president, Juan Laporta, who was there before as well, I'll use their words. They were technically bankrupt. So this club, they were fucked. This as a normal business, you would have to close it and then walk away from this. But this is Barcelona. So what do we mean? You said that billion was then. With the stadium that they're building, I think their debts are hovering near 3 billion, if you want to add all of this in. They had a bunch of money owed to other clubs, they had a bunch of other debt, and they had losses of nearly 500 million euros, right? This is at the end of the Bartomeu regime, the former before
post-Super League as well, after the initial desperate push.
And this is caused by overpaying Messi, bad transfer activity, COVID affecting gate receipts?
I think it's two things. You take COVID out as a separate thing because people make dispensation for this. There was two things. One, selling Neymar to PSG, which should have been a real boom because you're bringing 222 million euros, which is still mad to think about, into your club. And the other thing, the model is it's
So,
really
sorry,
easy.
your point about that sale is they then panic, go out and sign Coutinho and Dembele, waste the money.
I'll give you an anecdote on this. Yeah, they've got all this money to burn. They've got to replace this guy, and it's a presidential club. It's a country where you've got fans who are voting, right? So you have to appease these fans. What do you give them?
Well, I think there's a sort of sense of humiliation as well. Right? They've set what they think is an impossible release clause, and PSG go, yeah, we'll do that. And it's almost emasculating. The PSG have come along and we can afford that. Yeah, we'll have that.
So I suppose what's interesting. Sorry.
But there's a really good anecdote in terms of this. So we'll get onto the Messi salary in a second because that's the other big thing here. They needed players.
Sorry, anyway.
And it's gonna happen again, obviously. So Dembele's transfer was a remarkable feat of ridiculousness. This transfer happens in Monte Carlo around the Champions League draw. I can't remember what summer was it. It was 2019 when when Neymar went. 2018.
It was 2017 because it was the Gulf blockade. So suddenly they had a big flag to wave. I mean, if you want to throw more strands into this,
there's a great book, Miguel. You haven't done that yet.
There is. Well, actually.
So that summer, the windows, at that point, you're talking August, so there's about 3 or 4 days left. And Josep Maria Bartomeu, the president, he's there waiting to talk to Borussia Dortmund's board. The members are they're in a hotel room in Monte Carlo, and they say, right, we've got half an hour to do this. Then we're on a plane, we're going back, and then if we can't agree it now, not happening. So he's this guy Bartomeu, he's in the lift, going up to the room, and he's with another guy, another Barcelona official, and they say, right, this is our line. It's 80 million. We start with 60, we go to 80 because that's all we can afford, and that's what we think the players worth.
Euros we're talking here, yeah?
Euros. They have a hug, maybe a couple of kisses on the cheek. They go into this room, and the Borussia Dortmund guys go, right, it's going to be 120 million euros, and we've got to catch a plane. Done. This other guy goes to him, what have you done? What about the hug and the number? We agreed this thing. And he says, well, they would have killed me. The fans would have killed me if I got back to Barcelona without this player. And there you go.
I mean, it's so interesting, all of the psychology of it as well. And also kind of like what all builds to that moment. Because let's not forget, even the Neymar thing. Well, obviously, Qatar needs its big star as the country's being blockaded, so they're rolling news all the time. That's also a direct response to what is almost, I suppose, the final culmination of Barca's purely football era, which, I mean, also has Negreira weighing over, which we can get into. But the 6-1, which is kind of, in some ways, given they didn't win a Champions League afterwards, and it ended with like humiliations against Liverpool and Barcelona.
Well, even around after that, they're well beaten by Juventus.
Yeah.
But 3-0. It was very straightforward.
Yeah. But that was kind of their last great moment, the 6-1. And obviously, like, there's such a massive stung pride from PSG. And like, if it is PSG and Barca in the final this year, then like all this stuff wraps around, because of course it's Luis Enrique on the other side now. But yeah, like, but I do wonder as well. I mean, it's like Sepp Blatter has that line, which I do quote in the book. But football makes people mad, and I don't think that's ever truer than when suddenly all this money's involved. And Barcelona were basically sent mad by the scale of this, because there's so many elements of it. And one of them, as Tariq has touched on, is the model. Now, like, obviously, the fan-owned model has been held up. It works so well in, I think, across Europe. But one of the specific issues with the major clubs in Spain and Portugal, it's not so much a case for Athletic Bilbao or Osasuna, who I suppose could have different models and they don't sign players in that way. But in Barca, Madrid, and to an extent Benfica, Porto, it creates this populism basically that then that is given to like very short-term decisions all the time.
But if you think about it, it doesn't happen in any other walk of life, does it? That maybe it actually happens in general elections, but you give power to people who they don't care about the finances. They're just looking for short-term. Well, we want this centre forward. We want this
I am
playmaker.
a legend. I will be a legend.
There's this,
And
there's personal glory.
There's no sort of thought of this. There could be bankruptcy. That's going to make things difficult in 2 or 3 years' time. Everything is short-termist.
Yeah, well,
I don't see any way you break that.
Well, they were bankrupt. That's the other weird thing. So, we had that phrase with the banking crisis, too big to fail. And I think Barcelona have proven, which is really bad for football, that in some cases you can be, because we're Barcelona. And the thing here also is this thing that we're Barcelona, so we have to win.
Yeah.
I also find that a really strange thing.
Was it Laporta that said to you, winning is a universal emotion?
Yeah, I interviewed him just after they started doing all of this. This is football. There shouldn't be guarantees of winning. And don't forget, we're old enough to remember Barcelona were not winning. Everything. This is quite a modern.
They're prices.
When we did our episode on club DNA, we made the point that Barcelona's DNA is precisely not to win.
Yeah,
it's to let things slip at the last. That Barcelona winning Champions Leagues is a very, very new phenomenon. It's only the last 20 years it's become fairly well. They won one before the last 20 years.
Just to go back to the other reason, that big Messi, the shadow of Messi. Obviously, you have to pay the best player in the world this salary, and they're in this world where he appears when these golf teams have appeared. Who are spending more and offering more, and that money is available, and they know what their worth is. But
Jorge Messi, I think, almost more than any other footballing parent, has a good idea of what his son's worth. Jorge Messi is a magnificent negotiator.
It's in Josh's book.
Josh Robinson's book.
Josh, our friend of the podcast. That basically the Messis wanted Barcelona to sign Di Maria. I think Barcelona, made a half-hearted attempt to try it. Oh, look, it can't happen. They just say to him, "Well, let's give that money to Leo."
Amazing.
Okay.
And they do that money.
They do. They're so terrified of losing him that they just give
money
him the
ended up
cash.
being half a million euros a week or something. I mean, the numbers were so off the scale. But when you're in a team sport, the other players are going to say, "Hang on." Especially this sort of the Catalans. There was this issue with Piqué's enormous salary that Piqué was on, and Jordi Alba as well got an enormous pay hike. All these guys, their wage bill ended up I think it being double of Real Madrid's.
Yeah. At one point, wasn't it close to 100% of revenue? So I might not have those figures exact, but it's not far off.
Because like I was saying, you're spending other people's money, and the thing that I find really strange, or how this was kind of allowed to happen, is when Laporta comes in, Barcelona are in the crisis. So the second iteration of Laporta 2022 is the technically bankrupt club, and there's a grubbiness around this presidency. I don't think we can say is that pristine club anymore at all, and that's long gone.
I mean, I think it was always a bit of a myth, but yes.
It's a myth, but they do know they didn't have the sponsor. And
the thing is, some people in football would always say, and some fans, that one of the most off-putting things about them was actually the sanctimony.
Yeah,
we the morality of the football.
Oh, but they play the right way, Miguel. All these horrible teams who sit deep and defend against them. It's disgusting, appalling.
Like, even in his presidential campaign, there was so much kind of murk. There's like Gulf money involved in helping his campaign. I was talking to someone who was telling me, do you remember that poster there's one in Las Vegas where there's a big poster of Laporta, like an Ayatollah. There was another one that was plastered in front of the Bernabeu when like, I'm ready to come back, everyone, when he announced it, that there may have been some sort of Gulf money in propping him up in terms of this. That then the guy comes in and he puts kind of all his mates in these positions. It is something that sullies what for many people, whether true or fiction, is is this image that people like of Barcelona. I feel like this man has done everything to kind of to ruin it, despite this beautiful football. What has he done? All of these. Now we want to talk about he calls them these levers. This is selling these assets. He sold Barcelona's future away, essentially. 25% of the TV rights here, seats here, something called Barcelona Studios. It just all looks so awfully murky.
Even on a basic level, talking to people, like the idea that these fan-owned clubs, where you have what you want, and a lot of what let's say fans of Manchester United would idealise, say, and yet to start selling off chunks of it to private equity, it just inherently feels wrong. And there's no need to do this beyond this kind of mad rush. But on the point about there are kind of certain parallels with, say, FIFA. Like, why do these institutions give an individual so much power? Why is so much based from cycle to cycle? Because that in itself creates problems. And surely when we've got a club like that, how can they not just have some sort of, like, almost like in a political party, like, say, the grandes that kind of at least can anchor the president a bit, and you have longer term principles or culture applied, rather than just suddenly these wild swings when one individual comes in.
Do you think Cruyff used to do that? Was that the role he fulfilled there?
I mean, because he was all constantly at war with Nunez, wasn't he?
Yeah, I just wondered if he was more sort of a... it's perfectly reasonable to have ambivalent feelings about Cruyff. That he is not sort of some sort of pure messianic figure, but equally, I do wonder if he provided a moral conscience that just kept the old Barcelona a little bit more grounded than they are today.
Like a check, another power poll, basically to keep it like maybe. But to go back to, should they be in the competition? They shouldn't be here because they have failed FFP, really. So if you want the rules of the game to be followed, that's what happened. But we wouldn't have had that incredible game last night that we talked about. So but why would they have failed FFP, and they might fail it again? Are these random sales? So the most recent one, when they needed to find some money, Laporta said they've sold 100 million euros worth of future revenues for VIP seats to a place that loves VIP seats. Qatar and the UAE, apparently. Or was that VIP over there?
Yeah,
and they said, who are they? Nobody knows. But we got 100 million. So
what
had happened?
What a stroke of luck.
back of the sofa. And they had an auditor who didn't sign off on this, but they needed it to be done by the end of the year, by December the 31st.
To allow them to keep playing Dani Olmo, right?
Well, to allow them, to present this revenue and to say this is legit money, even though no one knows where it's coming from. They did find an auditor. It's funny, you can find anyone if you look hard enough. And they found a local Catalan auditing company that signed this off by the end of the year, sent it to Mr. Tebas and his crew at La Liga, and they said, fine, but this, when your audited accounts come out in a few weeks, it has to be there. So this temporary auditing company that had like a 4-day job to get this through moves aside, then a proper one comes in, and none of that money is to be found, because if it is not real, that is accountancy fraud.
Which
so
would
this 100
carry
million
a jail sentence?
Could do, yeah. I mean, it's a crime to do this, potentially. So this is what La Liga is alleging, and they've denounced this firm to the authorities in Spain. But again, this is a football club. This is Barcelona. Look what we're talking about. It's mad, isn't it? And basically, Dani Olmo and I think it's Pau Victor shouldn't be allowed to play under these La Liga rules. So what does Barcelona do? They've gone to a Spanish parliamentary court or the sports ministry or something, and some deal has been done to allow these people to carry on playing. But, is it fair? Like, I'm sure other teams would love to have players they can't afford in their ranks to win a cup or to finish higher up the table, win the league. But Barcelona seem to be allowed to do this.
But it's where essentially, this is where criticism, say, of big club power is so relevant, because they have an institutional clout or weight that actually does have an effect in these situations. That, like, smaller clubs just wouldn't be able to get away with. And there is, of course, another dynamic to this. I mean, I would say in that sense, fair play to La Liga for being so kind of assiduous with them, but La Liga themselves and locked in these bigger wars. Like, I mean, how willing are UEFA, say, going to be to? And there's a similar dynamic with Chelsea, who have been also under investigation with the Abramovich thing, and the kind of the payments that weren't known about. But how willing are UEFA, say, going to be to properly punish clubs if at the same time, well, say in Barcelona's case, there is both a political and commercial incentive to start to draw them away from Madrid in the whole Super League thing. And then there's another dynamic to that where FIFA and UEFA are currently locked in this cold war about who's going to control the club game for the future. And Madrid have already shown that they're kind of more in with FIFA at the moment. So and like, I mean, we kind of come back around to the issue of these presidencies and so much power, and also the conflict of interest when a regulator, a sporting body is both a regulator and a competition organizer with commercial interest. And you've got, again, all of this swirling around and creating this. And I know people go on, oh, look at the footballer producers, nothing really changed in the long term. But as we've seen with Barcelona's recent history in that sense, these things do eventually kind of swirl around and catch up with you at some point. There does come a
the other strand
with the Super League.
The other strand of this, which is related to the Super League, is Alfredo Riano, who's I think it's fair to say he's quite a passionate pro-Madrid columnist.
But he does criticise him a lot, to be fair.
But he's got a very specific image of what Madrid is. But he's obviously a Madrid fan as well. He's not necessarily a pro-Perez figure. Yeah. But his column this week was laying into Perez for not being more critical of Barcelona over these whole financial shenanigans, on the grounds that he has to remain allied to them because they're the only remaining partner in the Super League project.
Yeah.
So the Super League has become this overarching political issue that almost sort of shapes everything else.
Yeah.
Well, for Florentino Perez, Barcelona is vital for these big politics for sure, and it reminds me. I can't remember who the two characters were in Neighbours, but there was a scene with Bouncer the Labrador. See, which one are you going to come to? Because they both wanted this lovely Labrador.
It's Clive and
Mrs. Mangle.
Clive and somebody. Anyway, email us if you can remember that edition of Neighbours.
Anyway, in this example, Barcelona is Bouncer, right, and UEFA is on one side. And Real Madrid is on the other. This is my sense of it, at least. And that conflict of interest that Miguel raises is kind of, really apposite here, because Real Madrid and UEFA are in this kind of battle to the death, it feels like. And Barcelona is a key cog in this. And I really don't think UEFA will punish Barcelona. And they already did, because in a way that is meaningful, and we can see that this 267 million, one of these assets they sold. UEFA said, "I'm sorry, but according to our rules, it's football revenue on a year's basis, not whatever you're going to sell in the. It doesn't count." And that's a massive 267 million off your balance sheet. You'll be plunged into a massive loss. So what do? You failed FFP. We'll give you an €80,000 fine, which is what, I don't know, this one of the emerging left backs, knowing how much Barcelona pays, probably paid that, and that was the punishment. Barcelona then sort of sued at CAS, lost, and that punishment ended up being increased to 500,000. Now, if you're breaking the rules by that amount and those revenues don't count, I am assuming, and accountants can write in and tell us, maybe people who cover football finance in a more granular way, but they are sure to fail UEFA's FFP test, the licensing rules, come the end of this season, I think. What are they going to do? This would be a second, third offence. They're going to be in it next season. I'm sure they are. So I don't think.
They could be the champions with the most exciting player in the world. The idea
Yeah.
that UEFA would willingly take them out of their flagship competition, it's so unlikely that...
Not going to happen.
It's incredible as well, because one of the reasons, of course, that the club sort of put, and specifically Barcelona and Madrid pushed the button on the Super League, was because they were so irritated with UEFA's governance, specifically on 3 cases involving, well, actually 4, involving City and PSG. 2 from 2014, and then obviously 2 that emanated from, the Neymar Mbappe summer, and then football leaks.
So can I ask? I mean, it's interesting you raised those 2 teams, and certainly Miguel, you and I have been accused of being, having a particular view on City's case, for example, certainly in England. But it's just about the rules, isn't it? And the question I kind of have is why isn't Barcelona getting this level of scrutiny in terms of the criticism that, say, a Man City has? Man City's allegations obviously have reached 130, is it, these cases, and we're pending this Premier League ruling, and they're saying obviously they're innocent of all of this. But in terms of the negativity around Man City, essentially saying you've cooked the books to put a better football team out, and you're really successful and you're winning things. Aren't Barcelona also allegedly messing up with their books, putting a better product, putting better players on the pitch, and winning competition? So why are they not getting the same grief?
It is probably down to kind of the romance of perception, you know that. Also the history, all the culture, and I would actually say as well, part of it is ultimately when you look at City, it's the ownership is, we're talking about state power and everything that involves. And then with Barcelona, you were looking, it's kind of like one is from something coming onto football, whereas with Barcelona, it's almost from within. It's this club that temporarily has this leadership, even if the structure means that these problems are actually going to be cyclical. But it's basically, it's a specific leadership at one time, essentially trying to deal with what the club is. And like, there should still be a nobility to what the club is. I mean, a fan-owned thing, I think, is like, it's what football should be aiming for. It's just in these specific cases, it's completely the wrong model.
I think we all have a romantic idea that the club should belong to the fans.
Yeah.
But the problem is, we've seen these presidential models where members have a vote, leads to short-termism, leads to populism. I mean, you talked about Spain and Portugal. Look at Argentina; it's way, way worse. The short-termism of Argentinian football. So that doesn't seem to work. But equally, you look at the Premier League, which I guess is the opposite end of the scale, with anybody you can buy, is allowed to buy, and then you end up with states, private equity, oligarchs owning clubs. What do you do to get an ownership that is not short-termist and populist, but still gives the fans some kind of say, and isn't in hock to global geopolitics and global financial trends?
Well, this is, I suppose, you go into kind of like basic political science models here, and how you can create a democratic structure in a club with appropriate checks and balances. It is pretty much that simple. And then it's like talking to like guys who work in Sweden, particularly at Malmo, say like what they say they've had their members who don't just see the club as having to win, they see the club as this institution that has to be protected, and they will vote against certain expenditure because the way they put it, we see everything else is going on in football and we want the club to be here in 50 years, whereas others don't. And it does feel like it comes down to that simple. And like, it's funny, the Europa League semi-finals, and we're about to get onto the Europa League as a concept, but the Europa League semi-finals are actually, it's amazing how it's lined up, and they're almost, other than maybe the presence of states or private equity, these semi-finals they present such amazing contrast, in that you've got on one side 2 fan-owned clubs from very different areas who have built in the most organic way possible, really, Bodo Glimt and Bilbao. Now, Manchester United and Tottenham are obviously, they have built organically over decades, but in the last 20 years, they've benefited from something that isn't really, well, they've benefited from essentially this disproportionate amount of money in the Premier League and the Champions League. They're owned by billionaires who the fans don't like. And they've become, against these kind of models of efficiency on one side, which I was the better example of fan ownership. You've got, I mean, you couldn't really have a greater illustration of waste in football than United and Barcelona, United and Tottenham. It shouldn't be possible for them to be as low as they are in the league. But here we are.
But I mean, you touched on Sweden there and Malmö. Now, I was in Sweden last season, went to 3 games in 3 days. Went to Malmö, went to Norrköping, and I went to Hammarby. And the thing that struck me there, particularly at Hammarby, is the power of the ultras, and that struck me as from a distance. That's quite an attractive thing. They make all this noise. They have the good of their image of the club at heart, but actually, it's not really a good thing if the ultras have that much power. And I'm not suggesting that Swedish ultras are connected with organised crime in the way they often are in, say, South America. But the fact that you turn up and like, turn your camera off, we don't want any pictures of us. Okay, that's unnerving. Why not? The fact that they all have, whether the sort of the ski masks, so you only see their eyes, which may be just something let off flares. But even then, and I realise that I'm going to sound like a very dull 48-year-old man here, but it wouldn't be the first time. I'm not sure setting off flares in stadiums is that good an idea. I see why we have fire regulations that say you can't do that. But even a very simple thing that the Hammarby game I was at, because they threw so many flares and smoke bombs, the game was held up for like 10, 15 minutes, whatever. Which it's fine, doesn't really matter. But you had several instances in Sweden last season, and this happens in all countries where you have a serious ultra culture, where games are delayed often for half an hour. If you're like a family who's got to catch the last train home, that's not good for you. You want to know what time it's going to start, what time it's going to finish. Yeah. So I just sort of think it's impossible to run a football club in a way that's not awful.
Well, in that, I've got a question there. In terms of the ultras, what proportion of the fan base is that?
I would guess maybe it's difficult because you've obviously got the hardcore of the ultras, then the people who sort of hang around the edges of them. So I would guess maybe about 10 or 15%.
There are blurred lines there as well, because what they did in Sweden specifically, like around 08, 09, and they saw like as football was obviously going in one direction in terms of like more expenditure, more neoliberalism basically, they realised they were in this race with, say, the Premier League and the Liga that they couldn't win. And like all their fans are supporting kind of English or Spanish clubs or whatever. So they went the opposite direction. Well, why don't we just maximise what we've got, which is the fan experience in stadiums? So I think that's where there is, like, obviously the ultras are core of that, but I think sometimes it can appear ultra when it's not necessarily, if you know what I mean, or elements of it can be. So they've gotten really into the choreography around stadiums and making this part of a huge part of the experience.
The reason I brought it up, that there was that vote in Norway over VAR, where they said, and
Sweden doesn't have VAR. They voted against it.
Yeah, and it was out. Now again, this might be obviously the FA side that overruled the initial vote. Do you remember there was
what they did was the FA had put it to the top 2 divisions. The top 2 divisions, mandated by their members, had voted against it. So the FA then opened it up to everybody. And all these tiny little amateur clubs went, oh, actually, we back the FA.
So to your point again, this is maybe spin from the FA side, but they were saying what had happened was the silent majority of fans were okay with it, but they were cowed by the power of these ultras, and they had a voice that belied their size in terms of vote. Now I don't know, but in terms of the points you were raising earlier, that's quite a powerful 10%. It's a very, very, very vocal and maybe in some sense unnerving minority for some people, right? When it comes to democratic processes like that.
I think maybe to bring it full circle, because I've pulled up a stat here, and these are huge issues, but I do think exactly what we're talking about in terms of kind of football making people mad. One of the things that makes them mad in the wage race. And just on the issue of, and this is so directly relevant to the populism at Barcelona and Madrid, UEFA's last landscaping report, 2024, wages were 89% of revenue of French clubs, 88% in Belgium, but in leagues with more fan-owned clubs, and not Spain, but actually Austria, Germany and Sweden, most wage to turnover was lower than 60%, which is about, in terms of like, that immediately, mitigates against a lot of the problems that Barcelona have. Without getting dull again, it's about political science and structures.
Now we've brought it back to what we really want to talk about. Let's bring the first half to an end, and we'll come back after the break to talk about our ideal last 4 for the Europa League. We'll see you then.
Welcome back to the second half of Libero with Miguel Delaney and Jonathan Wilson. Europa League, we've got 2 semi-finals. But what would be the perfect final for this competition? Second-tier competition in European football. And it's not about you favour this team or that team because you like them, or they have a right to be in the final. But what's a perfect semi-final?
Like a canon Europa League.
So I think you've got to ask, what's the modern Europa League for? So I think it's changed in role from what the UEFA Cup was in the 70s and 80s and 90s, when often it actually was a harder competition to win than the Champions Cup.
In the 70s and 80s, it was often, if you actually go through it, it was often a forerunner who was about to win the European Cup.
Yeah,
that happened in a few, especially Liverpool.
Because obviously you only had one champion in the Champions Cup, so you'd have second, 3, 5th in the top leagues. So the level was often, once you get to the last 16 and beyond, level was often incredibly high. So we're talking about the modern Europa League, which is the secondary competition. So I think it should be for the biggest teams in the medium-sized countries and the medium-sized teams in the bigger countries, and that's who should be battling it out. So if I can give you my ideal semi-finals, this is to set up Sevilla v Benfica in the final, because Sevilla just always win it, and they feel like the team who should be winning it. I mean, maybe that's just they have won it 6 times in the last 20 years, whatever it is.
They are the Real Madrid of Europe's second tier.
And Benfica, and Benfica always lose in the final because of the curse of Bela Gutmann. And I've done so many Europa League finals where the intro has been on the curse of Gutmann, and I really appreciate that, because there was a time in Europe where I seem to know that story better than anybody else, and that was great. So Sevilla is a medium-sized team from a big country. Benfica is a big team from a medium-sized country in footballing terms. And then I think the other teams...
Eastern European. Eastern European team has to be there.
You want a good Eastern European team, so a Sparta Prague, or in the days before the war and Russia being exiled, Zenit were a classic Europa League team. Your Ulkes, your Axel Witzels, your Andrea Sharvians back in 2008. And then, so let's say Sevilla against Sparta Prague, given we probably shouldn't readmit Zenit unilaterally.
Shakhtar Donetsk, no?
Shakhtar maybe.
Are they more Champions League?
Well, did they win the Europa League in... No, they didn't, did they get to the final and lose? I feeling they lost the final in Turkey back in... it
was 09, I think, wasn't it?
Was it? They won it. They won it. They beat Werder Bremen.
It was 09, yeah.
Yeah.
So what
right.
you're saying, we want Eastern European teams with cloudy ownership, Shakhtar's owner.
And then in the other semi...
Yeah, there you have Shakhtar.
Let's have one of the 2 big Scottish teams and a medium-sized German team. So just because it was the final a couple of years ago, let's go Sevilla against Sparta Prague and Benfica against either Rangers or Eintracht Frankfurt.
But to Miguel's point, we had this more recently, didn't we? When you said it used to be a UEFA Cup winner would win it was 2004, and we had Jonathan's ideal final, or an idea of it.
Celtic. Celtic, absolutely. Great game. Great night.
Incredible game.
Absolutely abysmal organisation.
But isn't that another... I think that is actually pretty key here, that we kind of... The Europa League itself has to mean something for the club. So it's not just a compensation prize for not getting... Like, we United, even... Not Spurs, actually, because they haven't won a trophy since 2008. They would really value it. But we United say, it's like... Yes, the Europa League would be good, but A, they've won it recently, and B, it does feel like it's more about getting into the Champions League and essentially all the financial issues they've got, especially PSR. So the club has to really value it as an achievement, because they say they'd never really get into the latter stages of the Champions League.
Well, Chelsea are a great example of that, aren't they? Because they did the Porto in reverse. So they won the Champions League in 2012, then 2013 they win the Europa League, and... obviously they celebrated, but they're almost celebrating it resentfully, as if we shouldn't really be here. It's like Sunderland winning the Papa Johns.
Although Chelsea was about completing the set, wasn't it?
They did, yeah, it is true. They completed the set. They had that, yeah.
Was this the game in Baku?
No, this was the one in Amsterdam.
Yeah, they beat Benfica, because Benfica always lose in Europa League finals. Was it Ivanovic header?
Yeah, Rafa Benitez as manager.
Yeah,
the interim.
So Benitez winning it for the second time because he won it with Valencia back in 2004, beating Marseille. Valencia, that's a perfect Europa League final.
Well, a perfect modern final, because I would say before that, obviously before it, essentially they they were done for match fixing. Marseille were very much a European Cup club.
Oh, but yeah, it's a very brief period. It's sort of the late 80s, early 90s is their only real sort of period of the absolute top of the French tree.
And you have a fan base that's going to travel as well, right? With these teams, that's what you also want in the final. You want the two sets of fans who are going to hopefully part of the story.
Last year's was quite a good one actually. Atalanta Leverkusen. That felt like a good kind of solid final.
Yeah. I mean, so that's an example of two medium-sized teams from big countries. So obviously Leverkusen and Atalanta have had, they're going to finish in the top sort of 3 or 4 of their leagues this season. They are very good sides, but there was a sense with both of them of we can't quite believe that we've got. I mean, Atalanta had won a Coppa Italia in the early 60s, but that was their first trophy. Leverkusen famously won nothing until last season, and that ended up being the one thing they didn't win. But both sides had a great story, this sort of great energy, this sort of zest for the competition. You could feel the excitement of their fans, their management, of being in a major final. Dublin was a really good host for it as well, because there was a sense of Dublin thinking, this is brilliant, we've got a major European final. Yeah, I was there for a couple of days before the game, and every cafe, every bar you went in, you saw fans of Atalanta or fans of Leverkusen, locals talking to them. It sort of had this. It obviously wasn't as big as a Champions League final, but in some ways the atmosphere was much nicer because everybody was just excited to be involved in it.
There's a throwback element to that final in a way where we work in this, so we're supposed to know who everybody is. But I think a game like that, people discover. Atalanta or Leverkusen, and then look, Ademola Lookman. Didn't I remember he gets There was a kind of special moment to the occasion that you can kind of just ring fence this moment at this time, this great game. And you're going to remember it. If it was, say, I don't know, Man United, Ajax or something, you'd probably forget that.
2017.
2 days later, right?
Yeah. I was at that game. I know United won it. I don't remember anything about it. It was in Stockholm, wasn't it?
Stockholm, the only thing, it was the day after the Manchester bombing. So it did have a different emotional scope. But in terms of the football, it was, But it's like after the Atalanta game last season, Gasperini had that incredible quote that this is a victory for meritocracy in football. And it shows there's still space for scope and ideas in football. And it does feel like that kind of reflects the Europa League now, the modern Europa League, because, I mean, with the Champions League, it is essentially the same 12 clubs all the time now. And they happen to be the Super League clubs with PSG, Dortmund and Bayern in there. 15 clubs. It doesn't usually stretch to that. Whereas with the Europa League, it could genuinely be like you've got such a wider scope and breadth about it. But this is one of the things with our industry in that sense. Someone who does the Champions League a lot by definition, and I'm not complaining here, but with the Champions League, you do end up in a lot of the best European cities all the time: Madrid, Barcelona, Munich, Paris,
Manchester,
London. But it's the same, and it's great to travel. But like one of the little insights about the job as well is like one of the joys of actually doing football journalism that it has changed a little bit was it would bring you to places that you wouldn't otherwise go to. Like that is a great kind of bonus to the job, a great advantage of it. And the Europa League still allows that to a certain degree. But then of course we've got the other issue that's kind of surrounding all this as well, which is about, and this is actually a problem the Europa League has got now, which is about the size of the final venue. So say Dublin last year, perfect for Atalanta Leverkusen. Had Liverpool got there, which was at one point looking very likely, it wouldn't have been big enough to host it.
To be honest, even with Atalanta Leverkusen, I stayed in it was a nice hotel, but it wasn't a brilliant hotel. And it was quite close to the ground, to the Aviva. 300 quid a night. It's bonkers. The hotel prices just go through. I mean, Bill Barrow at the minute. We let's not tell people which hotel we're in, but we're in one of the cheaper chains. Because you're in the same one as me, right?
Yeah. But
and we're paying like over 200 quid a night for that, and I'm sure that'd be like 60 or 70 quid on a normal day.
I was having a discussion actually with a Spurs fan shortly before I came on air, and they were asking me about kind of like what I'm doing for the final. They should like the English clubs get there, and also because like my mother's family are from near Bilbao, so we've got some knowledge of the area. And I was like, if it's terrible to say this, but you should have been looking at this months ago, because it's now so high. Unless you want a journey where you're going from Santander, which shouldn't really be what a final is about. But there is he made the point to me. Christ, we're getting priced out of the game a bit, which is true. And and it's amazing this is happening for a Europa League final. I know this is an industry attached to football in that sense, but how exactly do you mitigate against or work against price gouging in that way?
Well, I thought this when Guardiola made his point about the FA Cup semis.
Yeah.
In an ideal world, absolutely, the FA Cup semis would not be at Wembley. They'd be at somewhere that's roughly equidistant between the two clubs involved. But the reality is, and I'm saying this obviously with a northeastern hat on, it's much easier and cheaper to get from a northeast to London than it is to get from a northeast to Manchester and stay overnight.
Yeah,
so as soon as you get a big game in Manchester or Liverpool, hotel prices go through the roof. The truth is, in Britain, east-west travel is more difficult than just going up the east coast or up the west coast. So from a northeast point of view, having the semi-final in London is just as easy as having it. Is easier than having it in Manchester, Liverpool. Obviously, if you're from Manchester, Liverpool, you want it in the northwest. I see that point.
So from a sort of European perspective, though, it's kind of a problem created by football's popularity as well. The game is so big.
Yeah.
You're going to have this, so you can't. There's going to be 4 or 5. I'm looking at UEFA when they're choosing Champions League finals now. They've only got a list of 5 cities now, really. 5 or 6. They keep coming back to London, both for the fact they want to get as much revenue as possible. A London final is extremely lucrative for them, but also there aren't that many places that can host a Champions League final. So and then you look at the second.
So let's go through them. London can, Munich can,
and even Munich, I would say just about in terms of kind of hotel capacity and all that.
Berlin.
Lisbon can. Madrid.
Lisbon can. I mean, Lisbon in 2014 was pretty...
No, I think it's because now Lisbon is such a kind of tourism hotspot.
Okay.
That it's kind of really grown in capacity in that sense, and they host a kind of web summit say every year.
I dare say Paris as well, but
the stadium.
Except they won't use Paris.
That was such a disaster, and it's
that's a stadium issue rather than a city issue. The stadium's not good enough. The surroundings of the stadium.
Capacity, for
Italy? Is there anywhere in Italy?
No, I don't think there's any in Italy because they don't. Rome, I don't think the stadium is good enough anymore. Same issue with Milan, and Milan's really a bit too small as a city, which is amazing, really. I mean, Rome. Okay, when they eventually sort out this, because it was supposed to be the San Siro next year, wasn't it? But it was taken off it because the stadium is still uncertain. But the new one in that sense is actually Budapest.
Which is Orban's very clear policy, and it is a great stadium. It's a great city. I'll be interested. I mean, it did the Europa League final 2 seasons ago. Yeah, before Dublin, and that was fine. The Champions League is a step up. We'll see how it copes with that next season.
But the interesting thing there, I suppose, is because UEFA always they pick them 2 or 3 years in advance, but they're now in a situation if one of the major English clubs happens to be in the Europa League, or a major German club, to be fair, although Bayern are always going to be in the Champions League, suddenly there's almost this kind of this sweat every year. Well, if the English club gets here, we've got there's going to be a lot of logistical trouble.
Well, there's that final, the Arsenal-Chelsea final in Baku that you mentioned earlier, Tariq. But you got in the Conference League, and again, the Conference League is obviously the next level down. Chelsea fans going to Wrocław for a stadium that's just not big enough to host a Chelsea game.
Do you think what you were talking about earlier? Chelsea really are not.
They shouldn't be
not what the Conference League was for to have Chelsea. But on these stadiums and all of these venues, there's enormous politics attached to this. When UEFA is selecting these places, this is it goes back to this issue of politics and business. This is a president of UEFA, and he is trying to be popular to his electorate. So, I'll give you a Europa Conference League, and you'll support this, and I'll give you a Champions League here, and this is how we end up in situations with, I don't know, say Cardiff hosting a Champions League final,
which was a nonsense.
Which it clearly was not designed to do. The rail infrastructure, airport infrastructure, whatever you want to call it. Imagine it just shouldn't happen, but this will keep happening. There's a situation recently where I think Istanbul.
That can't be used again either.
Has got Besiktas stadium has managed to get two
Europa League final next season,
and a Super Cup final. The reason, allegedly, Bucharest was a rival for one of these. It's got a new stadium in Bucharest.
Good stadium.
A good stadium. I think it was 55,000 seats. It had the capacity, but politically,
the Romanian Federation, Brileanu,
president.
It's the main challenger to Ceferin. I mean, it's amazing Ljubljana hasn't had a Champions League final. The way that Ceferin dishes out favours to Slovenia.
And in the context of all this, producer Tom has raised a valid point. So rather than all these European cities, well, what's maybe the next step, especially with this new deal they've done with Relevant, this marketing agency? Well, it could be potentially Champions League finals in the States.
Yeah, well, I'm sure that's on the horizon. I mean, yeah, and then Riyadh.
The cost of that would just be...
But be a Baku-style cost. And on that bombshell, guys, it's been great talking. And if you want to contact us, you can reach us where, Jonathan Wilson?
What you want, Tariq, is the email address, which is liberopodcast0, the digit 0, after the words Libero Podcast at gmail.com. liberopodcast0 at gmail.com.
And if you found any of this interesting, please like and subscribe. Even if you haven't, please like and subscribe.